Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Dyer, and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, the 1st of November. Let me introduce you to this week's Insider panel. We have Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward; Krista Kafer, columnist with the Denver Post; Eric Sonderman, columnist with Colorado Politics and the Denver and Colorado Springs Gazettes; and Penfield Tate, Denver attorney and community leader who served in both the House and the Senate in the Colorado legislature. Our election is just days away, and over 1 million Colorado voters have returned their ballots, and those are already being processed. But with our election being just days away, there are calls for Colorado's Secretary of State to step down after her office accidentally posted to its website under a hidden tab passwords to our state's voting systems. Those passwords are part of a two-step security process for Colorado's voting machines. This will be the most scrutinized and most consequential election of our time, Patty.
We did not need this. Jenna Griswold, and not just Jenna, but others have said we have the gold standard in Colorado for elections. The gold standard. Well, we're a little tarnished right now, and no one needs that heading into what is going to definitely be a disputed election. It's not just that the passwords were accidentally stashed away and then leaked. It's how her office handled it afterwards. The different election county clerk and election people across the state said they didn't get an advance warning. They learned of it several days later when the Colorado Republican Party sent out a press release. That is not the way to handle a problem in your office with a group of people who are putting their safety, their reputations on the line to run clean, efficient elections. I don't think this will affect the actual count. I think they're right that it's protected, but it's certainly going to affect perceptions.
Mm-hmm. Krista?
Patty's right. This was an egregious error, both the initial error in exposing the passwords, but also in not informing the clerks. I don't think it's going to have any problem going forward. They have corrected, they're resetting the passwords, they're doing what they need to do. But it is an egregious error, and the fact that, plus the fact that the office has a reputation for being overly partisan, this may spell the end of her career. On the other hand, I don't like the way that Republicans are using it to compare her to Tina Peters. An egregious error is not the same thing as doing something deliberately. And what Tina Peters did was to get together with her deputy and others and conspire to put these passwords publicly. She did a lot of other things as well. There's a reason why she's in jail. It was not an error in her case. It was a deliberate decision to break the law. That's very different than what's happening here with the Secretary of State. Yes, she should be held accountable, but in no way are these things at all something that can be considered comparable.
Two things. One, I think it's important to point out the security of this election was not in jeopardy. Yes, it was an error, it was a mistake, it was even egregious, but at no point was our election really compromised, and it was caught in time. Number two, when you live by the sword, you sometimes die by the sword, and Jenna Griswold has made herself such a public figure. What I really want to say is maybe she should spend a little less time on MSNBC and a little more time supervising her elections department and her office. She's become such a public figure on all these election issues and such a partisan, unlike previous secretaries of state, whether they had an R or a D after their name, that when you live by the sword, sometimes the sword gets you, and she is now a victim of her own partisanship and her own sense of prioritizing public relations.
And I think we need to take a deep breath and exhale. And remember this, context matters. The only reason we're having this conversation is 4 years ago, we had a candidate lose an election for the office of the presidency and refused to accept the fact, incited an insurrection, and still to this day has himself and some of his followers saying the election was stolen, the election was crooked. What they've decided is if you don't like the result, you cast aspersions on the entire process and try to get everybody to question and doubt the legitimacy of everything. Was this a mistake? Yes. Was it compounded by not owning up to it right away and telling people? Yes. Has the integrity of Colorado elections or balloting been implicated? No. Is there any damage or any harm? No. Should someone fix it so that it doesn't happen again? Absolutely. But I think it's time to just take a deep breath. Jenna's got to talk to folks in her office, fix this, ensure people that she's fixed it, and change how she addresses these things in the future. It's not right for so many county clerks to get blindsided by what happened.
It's only fueling more accusations,
Sure.
and stories and allegations
It
online.
makes it sound like you did something wrong when you didn't do anything wrong except you made a mistake. And Krista makes a good point. It wasn't intentional. Somebody goofed.
Depending on how Election Day pans out, Democrats could have a veto-proof majority in the Colorado legislature. So Democrats would have the power to override vetoes from the governor and also push certain measures to future ballots. But it's not assured. Anything can happen during elections, even in the so-called safe seats. Krista.
I'm not the only one that's hoping that doesn't happen. Right now, the governor is also crossing his fingers because he counts on not just Republicans, but moderate Democrats to make sure that really crazy proposals don't come forward. And if those crazy proposals come forward with a veto-proof majority, that's going to be on him. And actually on the whole party as more extreme legislation becomes law. I would say that we really need in this state a viable two-party system. And a lot of that fault rests with Republicans. You cannot put forth crazy conspiracy theory people and expect moderate Republicans and independents and Democrats to support them. They need to run serious people. Far more serious people ran this time. But think about the primary, where those that were not serious got a little bump in funding and a little bump in exposure because we have an unserious party chairman. He needs to be replaced. We need a serious person who can then do the fundraising necessary to support and recruit serious candidates.
Well, eventually is a very long time, Krista, and it's hard to imagine in the current environment when that comes. It was 20 years ago, this election, 2004, that the Democrats started their ascendancy and took over the state House and the state Senate, both surprisingly. And it has been, it's been astounding how this state has changed and how both parties have, one has prospered and one has declined. In these close elections or these contested elections over the last few cycles, I've learned not to bet against the Democratic candidate. There's just an inherent advantage to not having an R after your name in this state, because a lot of voters see the R for Republican and they transpose it and turn it into a C for crazy. And that is often unfair to the Republican candidate when that candidate is a responsible person. But one district in Colorado Springs that will go a ways in determining whether this is veto-proof, State House District 16, and it's what's become of our two parties. You have Stephanie Vigil, the incumbent Democrat, who is way on the left edge of the Democratic Party. That should be a seat that the Republicans take back or never lost in the first place. But Stephanie Vigil is running against a woman named Rebecca Kelty, who is an election denier, was out on the front lines of denying the 2020 election, is opposed to, is on board on all the social issues that are out there. And, so she has that C instead of that R after her name, and the voters have that choice.
From the perspective of good public policy, I think it is positive not to have a veto-proof legislature. When I started serving, I was in the House. It was 41-24. If you were a Democrat, you couldn't get anything passed unless you convinced a whole lot of people. But we had Governor Romer there who could veto some things, and there were enough of us to sustain his veto. I think the issue we're dealing with is it goes deeper and goes further. Eric, to your point, I actually think this started in 2000. That's when I went over to the Senate and Democrats took the majority of the Senate for the first time since anyone could remember. And that was because over time, the Republican Party had gotten in bed with the religious right, and too many of their really vocal primary candidates were winning the primary, and then we could run a reasonable Democrat and win in a seat like Colorado Springs, where we actually took seats when I was there. And I think the Democratic Party is in danger of doing the same thing the Republican Party has done over the years. So I'm not convinced that we're going to get that veto-proof legislature, just because I do think the pendulum is moving a little bit. And again, what's happening at the national level is sort of rippling through everything else we see.
Yeah. Patty.
Krista said the Republican Party was partly to blame. There's really no one else to blame. Over the decades, they kowtowed to the wrong people. And you talk about the rise of the religious right and everything that brought with it. And then you go further into the election deniers, and you also think, what is happening with the religious groups that are supporting Donald Trump and everything he says? I mean, there's a lot of confusion here. You're absolutely right. We don't want a veto-proof legislature. You want different voices to be heard. Fortunately, Jared Polis, who, it is funny, is now the moderate, has a lot of power. He's not going to be worried. He's not up for election again. He'll be able to use a lot of that power. But the Republican Party has to come back. And it's not inevitable that they can't. I think the fact that we have so many people who are registered as unaffiliated is because they don't like either party. And they would like to see, I think there are a lot of people in Colorado who like conservative views, definitely are conservative economically, but they just don't want to sign on with crackpots.
Let's talk about the judges on the ballot. We all know people who are just leaving that part of the ballot blank because they don't know any of the names, and there's so many of them. But our judges and justices have a lot of say in legal cases that shape our communities, and they often do make headlines for their decisions. Eric, all these judges were originally chosen by the governor, and then it's up to us now to reappoint them into their office.
Yeah, that is the system we have. And I guess I don't want to talk about individual judges or justices because there are too many of them to get into. Something is wrong with this process. I know this process, when it came about many decades ago, was regarded as a very progressive reform. And Lord knows, I'm not arguing that we go back to electing judges. That would be a step completely in the wrong direction. But that's not to say a process, it's aged over time. There's a rot that's gotten in the system. Lord knows the Judicial Department has been embroiled in its own scandal and hasn't exactly responded with a high degree of transparency or reform of its own. Any system where 99, rounded up, call it 100% of judges are retained in office, which is what we have, is not a meaningful, effective system. And if I was a governor or whatever, and obviously I'm not, I would put together a task force of serious people to look how we reform something that has atrophied.
I don't want to go back to electing judges. There's something unseemly, in my opinion, about someone who's supposed to be an impartial arbiter of your case running for your vote and raising money and asking to do that. So I have a problem with that. But the current system needs significant reform. Judicial branches at the state and federal level are suffering from a lack of public confidence in terms of what they do, how they reach decisions, and the lack of transparency and openness. People are beginning to question whether they really are impartial arbiters of a system. And we've got to fix that. And I don't know if it's reformulating the Judicial Commission, the evaluation process. You know, it used to be my mother and her friends would call me and say, which judges should they vote for? And I'm like, you know, Mama, I don't try cases anymore, so I'm not in court. So I don't know half of these people any better than you do. And I think that's happening more and more with the electorate. They have a list of 30 names. They're like, I never heard of these people before. And maybe you might see a name in a newspaper article every now and then, but generally speaking, you don't see them, you don't hear about them. And by design, judges make it a point not to be out in the public, not to be known, not to be visible, so as to properly administer justice in their courts. But we've got to fix this system because there's a long list of names, and I'm a practicing lawyer, and I didn't know 75% of them.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Patty.
Our story that most people have looked at in all our election stories is how you look at the judges and where you can find more information. Unfortunately, with the number, you have to have a huge staff if you're going to research them. I think the last time we really did an investigation of a judge was Lynn Huffnagel, if you remember her, a very controversial judge who did wind up losing. But it's so much time and energy, so the only really smart thing would be to reconstitute those commissions. Get citizens involved. There certainly are citizens upset enough about the system that maybe we can set it up, not unlike a new system with H, which I would encourage people to vote for. It doesn't go far enough, but we need more transparency. We need more accountability. And I think citizens working on those commissions would go a long way to at least getting them feeling they have a say. They're not lawyers, but they can certainly judge unfairness.
Mm-hmm. Krista?
I was one of those Coloradans that didn't vote that section, just because if I don't have if I'm not going to be thoughtful and due diligence and look at each one of these judges, I'm not going to vote one way or the other, with one exception. I did vote for Justice Marquez of the Colorado Supreme Court. She was one of the majority in the Anderson v. Trump lawsuit, of which I was part. I thought that both the majority and the minority put forth thoughtful opinions. But there are some on the right that want to punish those that voted in the majority in our case. And I was hoping I could at least nix out one of those punishment votes and say, job well done. Job well done for all of the justices that heard that case. That is certainly not a reason to oppose a judge. And so I did make an exception.
Okay, all right. There's a lot of flip-flopping when it comes to the ballots because there are so many candidates, so many issues, and a lot of back and forth endorsements, flyers, people at intersections dressed as lambs. I saw that earlier this week. Panel, I am curious, with all this going on, is there a measure that you've kind of questioned yourself on or you're flip-flopping on, or do you see an issue, the tide turning a certain way for something? I'll start with you.
You know, Kyle, I agree. But for the federal level, in my community at least, the issues are what most of the people are talking about. That's what has them twisted up. From a big picture perspective, one of the things I struggled with, and I think more people are struggling with, is so many of these measures are funded by increasing the sales tax. And that's the most regressive way to go because the tax is the same whether you earn $100,000 a year or $20,000 a year. And people are beginning to tire of that mechanism to fund a bunch of things. But the problem is even the sales tax proposal gets tied to worthy things. Most people I talk to support 2Q. They think Denver Health needs to be properly funded. The state needs Denver Health because it is the top level 1 trauma center in the state, and this 2Q I think is going to win. 2R I think is the one people are struggling with the most. Most people I know want more affordable housing, want more people off the street, but the way this is written, it looks like it doesn't sunset, or if it does, not for a real long time. And that's a whole lot of loot to be collecting to spend on affordable housing, and the mechanism itself isn't clear on what you're going to do or how you're going to do it. So a lot of people I talk to are troubled by that. And then the last one I mentioned, I am often a critic of RTD, but I supported RTD. We've got to have transit in our community. So I'm hoping RTD gets it together and gets the support they need financially to really invest in a vigorous, a safe, comprehensive, reliable, and affordable transit system.
We ran a story about RTD, just kind of the history, when light rail came in, up till today. And I have been surprised by the number of letters we've gotten from people who are so angry about RTD, not about our story, but about RTD, that I'm thinking that may well go down just because people are so mad. If they could vote and say, yes, you can keep the money as long as you fix your board and fix your routes and fix your communication. The horror stories people are telling about the boards that don't get when the next bus is coming by an hour, right? I mean, it's really been inconsistent. The one I'm flip-flopping on, though, is KK, and we've talked about it here. That is not a sales tax. It's the excise tax on guns, and it would go to more mental health, domestic violence, some law enforcement. And I'm going back and forth. Is it unfair for a right people have to buy guns? And it's also really vague in how the money would go. But those services need the money. So I haven't decided yet. Don't call me.
Okay, won't.
I flip-flopped on one issue. I went from disliking the initiative process to really hating it. And so in addition to the fact that I found problems with each one of those propositions, I also voted no because I don't like the system. The problem with direct democracy, which, there's a reason people call it two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner, right? There is no protection for minority populations. It circumvents democratic institutions. There's no way to properly vet costs and benefits. People don't necessarily hear both sides. It certainly favors those with money. And if you look at a couple of these proposals, a lot of money from out of state. This is not the way that we need to be making law. I went from not liking it to truly hating it.
Eric.
Well, with all this money Krista talks about, I personally need some more text messages to help me figure this thing out. I mean, particularly, those promoting the fur ban in Denver. Can you send me a few more messages with really ugly photos, tongue firmly in cheek as I say that? The one issue where I did flip my opinion before I filled out my ballot, and it really emanates from this table. I don't know if it's the most consequential on the ballot, Proposition 128, which changed parole eligibility. Intent is to force criminals, convicts, to serve a longer percentage of their sentence. And my instinct was, I'm not completely a throw away the key kind of guy, but I have maybe a few instincts in that direction. And we were sitting around this table talking about that issue. I was sitting next to Tyrone Glover, who I don't always agree with, and Tyrone and I sometimes engage in a vigorous discourse. But on this issue, I thought he was right, and pointing out what it would do to good time credit that prisoners earn in the joint, and how important that good time credit is to maintaining good management of our prison system. So I ended up voting no on that one based on a discussion we had around this table.
Yeah, thank you. I want to remind everyone that if you would like some insight into the various ballot measures, we've got you covered. Since early August, we've been talking about one measure every week, and have the full conversations ready for you to watch on pbs12.org/election as you fill out your ballot if you haven't done so already over the weekend. Now let's talk about some of the highs and lows of this week. Patty, I'll start with you on a low point.
Appropriate. In this last week of a very garbagey election, everyone is talking about garbage. From Biden to Trump, it really encapsulates what we've gone through.
Yeah. Krista?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And speaking of garbage, as I've researched all of the money that's coming in from out of state, I thought it was really interesting that Amendment 79, which would allow taxpayer funding for abortion, a lot of that money is coming in from New York, Bloomberg, Soros, and others. And I think, hey, you want to pay for it in your own state? Fine, but quit pushing that on ours.
It's an easy target these days, but Denver Public Schools, we just gave the school board just gave the superintendent, Dr. Marrero, a $17,000 300 bonus. As I pointed out online, I guess it means the district is firmly opposed to merit pay.
Okay.
I won't go as far as Krista, but when we talk about big picture things, our state initiative process needs to be reworked and reevaluated, because what's happening is voter fatigue. I sit at a kitchen table with my daughter and we go through the ballot, and after I first flipped the first page over and we were talking, she's like, "Dad, there's more." I'm like, "Yes, sweetie, there's 4 more pages of this stuff." We need to redo that process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, something good.
Far away from the election, Denver Arts Week starts tonight. 10 days of really fabulous things, including night at the museums, free admission, 5 to 10, Saturday night at 17 museums.
Yeah, fun.
That's fabulous. I also want to shout out to Ranke Brothers in downtown Littleton. I know this will air after Halloween, but it's still worth a visit to this quirky, fabulous, fun shop.
Yeah.
I want to pay tribute to a really good leader and an even better person. Scott Levin is stepping down after 14 years at the helm of the Anti-Defamation League of the Rocky Mountain region, the ADL. He's done a fine job. He is a wonderful human being, and we wish him well in retirement.
Hear, hear. Congratulations to Scott. And like Arts Week too, but big picture, congratulations to the LA Dodgers. They won a World Series a few years ago and didn't get to celebrate it because of COVID. It was the championship no one remembers or heard about, but congratulations to them.
That's right. Before we leave, any predictions? Does anyone want to go down the line and shout out anything regarding the next week?
Donald Trump said he's going to win Colorado. I think he's wrong, but I also think we'll be sitting at this table next week and still not know who won the presidential race.
I hit peak cynicism a couple weeks ago, so I'm at the point of not caring.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Definitely not at the point of not caring. I certainly am at the point of not knowing. I cannot tell you who our next president is going to be. I'll go slightly out on a limb and say Yadira Caraveo holds on to the Congressional District 8 seat, and the other 2 seats go to the Republicans, the Boebert new seat and Jeff Hurd in Boebert's old seat.
Okay. How about you, Penn?
I disagree with Patty. I not only think we'll know who won the election, something in my gut tells me it's not going to be as close as people think. We'll see what happens. I'm feeling a trend, and I don't want to speak to it specifically, but I think we'll know Tuesday who the new president-elect is. I think Caravale wins. I think Frisch wins also, and I think Boebert wins.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go back to a high for a moment, because my high comes from Monday of this week, the 50th anniversary of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which allowed women the opportunity to open a line of credit or to go and get a loan out without a male cosigner, things like that seemed so normal to us all now. But financial independence for women did not exist before 1974. And on Monday, Colorado women lined up at the entrance of the Equitable Building in downtown Denver, where the Women's Bank stood back in the 70s. So times have certainly changed. Look where we are right now with all the women whose names are on our ballots in hopes of being leaders for us. Look to our current woman vice president, who's hoping to become the first female president of the United States. And I know no matter where you are on the political spectrum, we do have to pause and just kind of look back to 50 years ago. We are coming and continue to make strides. So that's my high of the week. Thank you, panel, for joining us on this important conversation before Election Day. Thank you all for watching or listening to our podcast. I am Kyle Dyer. I will see you next week here on PBS 12. In the meantime, if you haven't yet, go vote before 7 o'clock Tuesday night.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.